and welcome to another E5 podcast. I am your host, Paul Meenan. I am joined and privileged to introduce my tag team partners, my brothers from another mother. Chaps, introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm JW.
And it's Dave Watts here, Sparky Ninja.
That's it. The three amigos are back. We're very random with these podcasts now, mainly because we're just too busy. That's fair to say.
What's going on with you then, mate? You all right?
I'm working 12-hour days, 7 days a week, pretty much.
Lightweight.
3 massive projects on the go and dozens of others. Don't really get much time for anything else. I worked through Christmas and New Year. They were basically weekends that I worked through. Didn't really do much. Apologies for the last 2 podcasts we did and we stopped because, one, I was exhausted when we were doing them, and we were going to do more, but everybody's really mentally busy, and this just has to be when we're all the stars aligned, really. John, how have you been?
Yeah, well, as everybody else, super busy, all kinds of things doing on, so just finding time to do other stuff at the moment. So.
How's the van doing, John?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
it works. The only minor thing is in the winter, because it's winter now, is that the range is considerably reduced.
I've heard people say the range is impacted in these temperatures.
Yeah, it's mainly due to the batteries themselves that just don't work as well in cold temperatures. So it varies depending on the actual vehicle you've got, but some are better than others. Mine happens to be one of the ones that's not that much better, but nevertheless, it still works. It still does the business. So
John,
just have to remember to charge it a bit more.
You did a video on YouTube of you driving the vehicle, and I was utterly disappointed that you didn't call it John Ward's Fast and Furious, because I have been a passenger in John Ward's van. He should be called Fast and Furious.
I want to do one of those long shots like with Mr. Bean, where he just turns around the circle and rears off at some 3-wheel van or something and knocks it over into a ditch.
Yes, the adventures of JW in his EV. I am planning to put an EV charger in this year. I'm going to get one in.
Oh, you're home, yeah?
Yeah, I am going to invest in one and stick it on the wall, and I will never ever buy an electric vehicle, but I will have the facility for guests, and I made that promise last year, and by God, I'm gonna meet it this year. So at some point I will.
Well, you put the cable in, haven't you?
Cable's in.
Cable's in.
The Wago box. It's sat there waiting for the cost to go down, I suppose. Dave, you have done loads. You've been busier than most.
I've also been not well. I've had a cold like since before Christmas, and it's still kind of lingering. But yeah, I've been kind of pushing through with getting the sensor running, getting the sensor open. We've had some issues with our Application City and Guilds from their end. I won't say too much about their competence to do these quality assurance visits, but there was a clerical error, so we've had to have a second visit. We had a different quality assurer come and visit. Actually, just yesterday, he came to see us, and it was absolutely fine. His eyes are open, looking around the centre. Goes up to the classroom. He's like, "Whoa, that's a big room." Talks about the sessions and the idea, and I'm saying, what we're planning on doing with the different courses. Absolutely fine. Absolutely no problem with that. He said, "Yeah, push me through for approval." But the first time visit we had, I was actually in. God, I'm going to say this wrong, John. You can convert me. Is it Oswestry or Westry?
Something like that.
I don't know. We were at the ICO place, weren't we? And because we had this arranged in a Discord server, we had Paul, you were banging heads at government.
I was in Parliament.
Yeah,
so you were all in Wales. I do apologise.
We were there, and obviously we had a lovely dinner the night before. We stayed in a hotel, and then we went to the ICO building, and then halfway through the morning, I had the phone call that the guy was on his way. So there's a cock up with the dates as well. All that is done now, and we've got approvals. So now it's just a case of, okay, we'll put some courses on here and there. So it's a case of just getting some things running there, and obviously development of more stuff to hopefully relaunch the Spark Ninja YouTube stuff, because I get so many people asking for more stuff. But I don't want to just make content on there for the sake of it. There's stuff I want to put on there, but just takes the time to get it done right.
I don't think I'm going to speak on behalf of all 3 of us here. It's not in our DNA just making stuff for the sake of making stuff. It's making stuff because we're interested, and actually it's quite unique and a good opinion piece, and it may help people think and develop their own thinking, because we want people to level up with their own thinking, really, not necessarily listening to the rhetoric of the message that the industry gives. But my God Almighty, I haven't been able to do much social, so I'm not even going to apologise for that. But the industry, the big news of the industry is City and Guilds buying out trade skills for you. Without saying too much that will get me sued by someone, all I'm going to say as an end user is City and Guilds were the benchmark, and now they're somewhere in the gutters. Because that, to me, I don't know what the hell's gone on there, and I know it's business, but they should remain independent, remain setting standards, not be involved in anything like that whatsoever.
I've got one of my own little Facebook areas where I've got just trainers and tutors in there, and there is frustration and confusion in it as to why City and Guilds have gone into the space.
They shouldn't have,
but
they shouldn't have. I've had random phone calls from people when I've been on site who are lecturers and stuff. And they've just said that they've, vented, which is always good to vent to peers. But I can't disagree with them. The City and Guilds should not be buying training centres. They should be staying as an independent awarding body.
It's a little bit like our experience with the NIC in our careers, though. We grew up understanding. We learned about the NIC in one respect, and obviously in our career life, we saw the way the NIC behaved to be different, and we started to get a bit of frustration when their attitudes turned to more towards the selling of a book or the selling of a product. And we started to have these opinions that they weren't what they used to be. And for someone who's been working with City and Guilds, I'm even on the books with them as a qualification developer for the best part of 10 plus years now, there is this kind of evidence that they have kind of gone down that avenue of let's now sell courses and books, and there's an awful lot more selling. And a lot of us would like them to get back into the quality assurance, but it's just the name of the game, unfortunately. They are relaunching the electric vehicle courses. I've done the trainer training with the Discord guys for this new higher level. You have to be an electrician to go on these new courses. We'll see how those go. We'll see how they work. I've got approval for them.
I think it's fairly evident from what I've seen of them. They're going to get more difficult, more challenging. I will probably. What annoys me was when Dan did his years ago, like 6 years ago, whenever it was. He did one of the first ones. Then John did his, and I'm thinking, great, I'm the only one who hasn't done it. And then I've gone and done it, and about 2 months later, they go, yeah, I did. That qualification ain't valid anymore. It won't be soon. I'm like, oh, what?
Yeah, there's a lot of people said that.
I'll redo them next year. I'll do the EV installer courses next year. I'll do all three.
A lot of people said this. So City and Guilds have extended the 2919. But the 2921, which is this new one, which is in 3 parts, it hasn't got any practical at all. There's no practical at all in it. You have to be an electrician. That's the prerequisite. You have to be a JIB card holder or a level 3 or an equivalent electrician. And then there's the 3 parts. One is obviously the domestic. The assessments is that it's just the evolve and a short scenario. Then they split it into 2 parts, which is the large scale commercial. They put it down to the quality assurance and design of. And then there's a course on the installation and maintenance of. Those 2 are actually the exact same, except for 1 unit. So we're most likely going to just deliver them both and let people do both, instead of doing one then the other and having 90% of the material be exactly the same. But so there's a 3-hour project. There's a 3-hour design project on the new one. And one of the preferred requirements is that you have a 2396 first. Having looked at the assessment, it's not really necessary. It's a little bit of a gimme. There's
not to sound old, a
little bit of a.
Would they accept 2400?
Yes. Any competent college would. As long as you have been doing your CPD. So if you say I've done the 2400, we would then say, well, okay, have you maintained that between now and then?
I did for 2022. I logged and submitted 403 hours of CPD, and I'm ashamed of myself because the last 6 months of the year, I pretty much didn't.
You probably spent more time logging CPD than other people did doing CPD.
In all fairness, I did do, because trouble is, because I don't celebrate Christmas or New Year, so I will find myself online doing CPD training, writing the stuff that you're about to see now.
Yes, you wrote this a while ago. This one,
I wrote. Yeah, so we'll get into this. So we should probably say, well, that's enough about a bit more of an in-depth as to our thoughts.
That's more of a hello than we normally do, actually.
Yeah, recording our more intimate stuff. So welcome to this podcast, because today we're going to talk about something that has been jangling around in the background since the start of COVID. Okay, so 3 years ago, I started researching something, and today's subject is electrical installations in furniture, aka BS 6396. Now, the reason why it's taken me 3 years is because I had to read every edition of the standard. I then wrote the training material because it was if you remember, Dave, it was a project for me to be able to take a standard that nobody had heard of and nobody's developed any training on, and see if I could successfully do it. So this is kind of the output.
And then they updated it, didn't they?
Yes, and then they went and updated a full revision of the bloody standard, which then meant I had to go back and read all the old ones again and this, and then update it. So I've got some slides. This is going to be presented in the form of like we would do a live webinar. But if we did this as a live webinar, people would probably fall asleep.
Right. But for the people listening on the podcast,
yes,
we'll
to fall asleep,
describe them as best as we can.
Yes, so I am going to share my screen now, so hopefully you guys can see it. And we're now transitioning to webinar-y type format. So can you all see that?
Yes, we see that.
Okay, right. So BS 6396, we're very familiar with 7909. Well, Dave is, especially, you teach it. And all the relevant standards around 7671. But when I heard about this, I was quite miffed. How did this slip through the net? 6396. Okay. Electrical installations in furniture. Why did I miss this? And it's I think, given our knowledge of 7671 now, this is like a companion to 7671. It's an extension of 7671. It's specific detail for stuff that, to be honest with you, do people think about it enough? Now, if you work in the commercial sector, you may know this, or you may actually do this by default. So if you're doing like, you know, category fit outs of offices and stuff, this should be very relevant. But let's see if this works. Right. So it is a companion in what I was saying there. And there's a chap looking at both standards getting very confused. Who is it aimed at, this document? Well, this document is very clearly mapped out in across all the versions of it, that it's relevant to buyers. So procurement people, suppliers, people who on-sell stuff, vendors, manufacturers. There are requirements for manufacturers, safety professionals, electricians, and end users. So this standard openly says everyone.
So it's not a product standard.
Well,
is it more like an assembly standard?
It's a hybrid.
It's kind of it's like an installation or an assembly.
Well, it's all, because it's electrical installations in furniture. It used to be called office equipment and furniture. They've just rounded it down. So this new version we're doing it on now is based on the current full revision of the standard. But it does apply to the furniture, the testing, the electrical installation in the furniture, and what it connects to. Henceforth, it's companion of 7671. But I just found it really interesting when it referred to all these different people that it's relevant to be honest with you. So this is the frustration. So on the screen, we've got the earlier standard from 2015, and it used to be called Electrical Systems in Office Furniture and Educational Furniture, and was a specification. It's now called Electrical Systems in Furniture.
Okay, so you could stress that obviously over the past 10 years or so, we are starting to see in like coffee shops or airports and stuff, furniture with electrical parts inside it, which isn't just in an office environment. So you can understand the scope increasing in that sense. Everywhere.
Electrical installations are spreading into stuff we sit on, we eat around, where you go to a BP garage, there are USB sockets everywhere.
Tables with the chargeable points in them and all sorts of things.
So because everybody knows me, I'm quirky and sad. First edition of this was published in 1983, which was a long time ago, and I'd never heard of it. Second edition was published then 7 years later in April 1990, so no real rush there. 5 years later was the third edition of this, then the fourth edition 7 years later in September 2002, and then the fifth edition in 2008. And then obviously by that time they realized they couldn't just do an edition, they had to amend it. So in 2015, 7 years later, they did Amendment 1. And now 7 years later, it's Amendment 2, March 2022, this came out in. And I was very annoyed, and I was so angry. It's taken me since March to January of 2023 to finish the revision of it. But there you go. So there's the background, really. So it's been out, you know, a good, well, 80s, 90s, 30 years.
All right. So let's just describe for an electrician listening to this, thinking, okay, what is this covering that they may already be doing, or maybe thinking is within BS 7671 that this may provide further guidance for?
Yes, which is why I call it a companion. But before we get into that, I'm going to remind people before they fall into a coma that there is such a thing as a duty of care for employers to provide safe workplaces and safe work equipment, mainly under the Health and Safety at Work Act, Section 2. But also there's duty of cares within the electricity at work regs, provision and use of workplace equipment. And obviously, as we know, like with most British standards, they are guidance, but they can be used against you in a court of law. So stuff like BS 1363-2, 7671, and this could be used as supplementary evidence in a court law against you. So it's always worth mentioning that you've got a duty of care. Hopefully you take something away from this. You may not. You may just go, there's a standard that might be worthwhile using one day if I'm having a row with a furniture fit out company. But there's plenty of legislation that always underpins every single engineering decision we make and every document we read. Now, a favourite little GIF. This was written by a technical committee in the wire regs world. It's JPEL or JPEL 64. This was written by FW0, and they formed a subcommittee FW03. So a completely siloed.
FW.
Yeah, FW. I have no idea what FW is, to be honest with you. Furniture world, maybe. I don't know. Probably not. But there you go. This is the one thing that frustrates me. John, you read it out because it comes with you.
Yeah, like all of these BSI publications, there's a big disclaimer in the front, and this particular one, contractual and legal considerations or disclaimers. And what this one says is this publication has been prepared in good faith. However, no representation, warranty, assurance, or undertaking, express or implied, is or will be made, and no responsibility or liability is or will be accepted by BSI in relation to the adequacy, accuracy, completeness, or reasonableness of this publication. All and any such responsibility and liability is expressly disclaimed to the full extent permitted by the law. So, in other words, they're saying that although this is supposedly the proper specification for all this stuff, if it's full of mistakes and errors, then too bad.
So
it's up to you to identify this, and BSI will not be responsible in any way.
Not much of a leaning post, really. Yeah, FW is technical committees for furniture. So.
That furniture world, then.
Furniture world, yeah, we'll go with it. We'll go with furniture world.
I've just named a committee subgroup. But yeah, it's interesting that if we link this to the companion, I'm going to call it 7671, they've all got their little indemnities. We spend so many years as an industry and a trade arguing about the regs of law when they're not, their guidance notes, and they're all indemnified against any mistakes. No responsibility or liability will be accepted. Imagine if that appeared in the front of BS 7671. You've bought a book of opinions. Am I wrong? It's a book of opinions.
Oh, yeah.
That's a scary thing. Right?
That's what it is.
It goes on. This publication is provided as is to be used at recipient's own risk. The recipient is advised to consider seeking professional guidance with respect to its use of this publication. Do I go to DFS for advice? Because they got a sale on, by the way.
Things to sell you.
we should throw that in and just say we're not sponsored by them, but there is a sale on.
They'll have solutions, I'm sure, to sell.
This publication is not intended to constitute a contract. Users responsible for its correct application. Now that's in 7671. Compliance with a British standard cannot confer immunity from legal obligations. And this is their more ever increasing risk in using standards blindly. We're removing their engineering thought. I was in a conversation with someone the other day and they said we're becoming paralyzed by process. And I love that phrase because it was so true. Processes that were designed to do good were paralyzing the ability to do common sense. And they can also take you down the wrong road if the person using the process isn't capable to make wise decisions.
It's a very tough area to kind of draw a line with, because you can easily say that, but then you can easily then feed the animal that is those that will go, oh well, yeah, those are standards, but in the real world we don't do this because
In the real world.
you've got that gap between where you've got the real world people that will ignore rules, procedures, and systems that are there to protect you. But then you have too much process which restricts common sense. It's trying to find that space in between.
But just on this, so John, if that slide and the one before it was in BS 7671, do you think it would make a massive difference to the way we look at 7671, the way that's worded?
If we read it properly, we would probably.
Well, yeah, have we read it properly? Yeah, I mean, the problem is if you're going to make a standard that's supposed to tell people what they're supposed to be doing, and then you're going to say that actually it's full of rubbish and it could be wrong and we're not going to take any liability, it kind of devalues the whole point of having it in the first place. And like we've got here, it says you're supposed to consider seeking professional guidance in respect to the use of this publication. But then if you've got a professional about furniture manufacturing and electricals in furniture, what are those professionals going to be referring to?
That's the point.
If not this professional standard.
What is professional guidance if not this?
Yeah, this is the guidance, and then they're saying, oh, actually, you should consult somebody else that tells you that. Yeah.
I mean, is that the equivalent of me going to like a common person scheme instead of looking at the regs? Is that my professional guidance?
Well, and this is the thing. Remember, this was updated in line with Amendment 2. So this came out at the same time Amendment 2. It actually came out a week before. So if you read this, you're actually getting a preview of Amendment 2. Ironically, same with 7909. Do you remember? 7909 draft for public comment came out before Amendment 2 and was aligned with Amendment 2. So if you read 7909 draft, you knew all the change or a lot of the changes that was in 7671. So much for secrecy, eh? But yeah, I think I like this wording because it's Janet and John clearer. This is a book of opinion. Basically.
But does that make the people who don't really respect things like 7671 make it easy for them to just disregard it further?
I'll be honest with you, I'm not going to lie. There are times in my career where I have not respected 7671 at all. I think it's in a better state now than it ever has been in many years. But I think that's probably because of peer and industry pressure from the commenting system saying we're not people over the years have swelled up to say no, we want to take some feedback into the regs more, which is good. We know that there are BS and BSEN standards that go online, and you look at the draft public comment and they'll say be a new 60364 standard, which is really important. It'll have a draft of public comment for 3 months, and then when you look at the closure, it will say number of comments received 0, none. Yeah. So it just gets rubber stamped. And it's
we've seen them where the drafts or the windows are like that long. They're days sometimes.
Well, we had one that was 3 days, weren't they?
Yeah.
Which goes against BS0, their rules, but we emailed them and told them that it was against their rules, and they went, "Oh, just send the comments and we'll forward them on," which is them basically saying they're not rules, they're more like guidance. But there you go. So moving on, what is in scope? So the standard BS 6396, it says this British standard specifies requirements for the provision and assembly of electrical power, data, and telecoms distribution systems in furniture. So I would argue, yes, it is a manufacturing standard and installation standard and everything else. Requirements are specified for furniture for general use and also for use with specific equipment, parts of which are potentially built during manufacture.
Right. So if I manufacture furniture that comes with equipment installed within it, and maybe then there's just a plug at the end, then this is part of that. But also if I put an assembly of electrical parts together in furniture, such as daisy chaining desks in offices and such, then it's also within the scope there as well.
So what we're going to do is we're going to skip through, because what I've done is I've taken out basically the key points of what's in scope. So this British standard covers furniture incorporating single phase electrical power distribution operating at a rated voltage of up to 250 volts AC that are either supplied by connection of the fixed wiring of the permanent installation of the building by a 13 amp fuse plug and socket outlet arrangement conforming to plugs for 1363.1 and 1363-2, and or derived from batteries at a nominal voltage not exceeding 48 volt DC. No provision is made for routing of cables through furniture. Now, I found an error in the standard, because one of the errors in the standard is we are not harmonized. It should say 230 volts and not 250. And that is from the original standard. And yet 7671 clearly says 230. We're all harmonized. So
what makes you wonder if the FW and the JP team actually refer with each other or not?
Apparently they do.
Do they?
Well, they're supposed to.
Right.
Out of scope, interestingly enough, in case you're wondering, this standard, and there are, for those listening, there are pictures of what we're talking about with this as well. This standard does not apply to electrical appliances used with or within an article of office furniture or educational furniture, like desktop lamps and stuff you plug in, for which appropriate standards are available. It then says any power distribution systems, as a note, that are connected to the building by anything other than a 13 amp plug within the furniture should follow requirements of 7671. So it's on a fuse spur and it's fixed equipment connected in. So in theory, if you had a row of desks, if you put them from a plug top to a fuse spur, 6396 wouldn't apply. In part.
Technically.
In part. Well, 7671 would apply and 6396, I'd argue. This British standard is not applicable to special purpose workstations in laboratories or workshops.
Yeah, they probably have their own little special area.
Yeah, no sparking and all that malarkey. So there were some new definitions, lots of definitions. Now, when I say new definitions, I mean definitions that are not in BS 7671. This is why I came up with the thought of this is a companion piece.
Right, so you're saying this is where it's different from 7671.
Yes, it is. So obviously the office term before the 2002 edition, this has now been deleted, but I wanted to include it anyway, because I've never seen this stuff defined. And having stuff defined is always useful to use. Office furniture is defined, which is defined as furniture intended for use in office environments to provide safe working surfaces, storage and space division, or to house or support information technology equipment, all being independent of the building structure. It's a nice, succinct way of putting it.
So that's not in there now, though, because obviously their scope has increased.
Hence all it says at the top, pre-2002. So educational furniture, which used to be the name of the standard, furniture for use in educational institutions like Sparky Ninja HQ, to provide working surfaces and storage, or to house and support information technology, IT equipment, all being independent of the building structure. And there's a very fancy picture of a desk that we could only dream of affording, Mr. Watts.
Yeah, that'd be nice. They don't do those at IKEA, I tell you that.
Please note it's Sparky Ninja colours.
Mate, yeah, but I haven't got those chairs either.
I have high expectations of Sparky Ninja HQ.
Oh, God.
When I go there later next month, sorry. So some new definitions. So we're now into the 2022 edition. This is new definitions. And one of them is appliance coupler. An appliance coupler is defined in a few ways. It is the means of enabling the connection and disconnection at will of a flexible cable or cord, i.e. an IEC kettle lead or a plug socket. It consists of two parts. A, the connector, which is part integral with or intended to be attached to the flexible cable or cord connected to supply, i.e. the plug top, which plugs it into the lead that's built into the desk, and an appliance inlet, which is part integrated or incorporated into the appliance or equipment. Very simple, plug goes into the wall, and then those nice little four-way things that pop out of the desks or just cut into the desk. So they are defined as the two parts of an appliance coupler. Very interesting new definition. Supplementary insulation has never been in that standard before, and it's independent insulation applied to addition to basic insulation in order to achieve protection against electric shock in the event of a failure of basic insulation. Now this comes back to that whole, is it double? Or
comes back to like how we would
well, meter tails, everyone said they're double insulation, but they're basic and supplementary, aren't they? Not necessarily double insulated. It depends on the use of the insulation and the make and the toughness of it, and
even what the manufacturer says,
and reading what the manufacturer says as well. Yes. So buildings permanent electrical installation, compromising the fixed wiring and fixed equipment. Very succinct. I don't think this is even in 7671. No, it's not. It's not in 7671. It's really interesting as some of these companion things you think that could be quite nicely fitting in 7671. Cable management is defined as a system to protect and organize cables, including cables connected to an item of office furniture or educational furniture, or to a machine or luminaire used in conjunction. Now, one thing I've learned on this journey is if you have a desk with lots of IT equipment on it, cable management for that desk is really essential. Again, to remove hazards of strain on the conductors, to ensure there's a safe place for electrical equipment and couplers not to be damaged or have things spilt on or knocked or give rise to temperature or fault or shock or harm. So some really interesting definitions. Cable management system, i.e. a duct or a cableway. And we've got some pictures of some very funky desks that lift up, and I've got like anaconda type connections. And that is a means of enclosing, protecting and separating cables, and a means for providing routes for cables to pass through the furniture and thus other elements of the furniture where appropriate. So really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the illustration we've got here really kind of shows the complexity of this. And when you think about BS 7671, you go to that point of utilization in the floor.
Yeah.
When you feel like something like PAT testing, of which we'll mention later, you would think, well, that's more complex than what the standard PAT testing work would come to. So this is really where this standard kind of fills that void space.
Well, maybe 6396 could be a training course for PAT testers.
It's kind of like a bolt-on, isn't it?
It is. And this
really
is this is the hybrid between PAT testing and 7671, possibly. I don't know. Let us know what you think if you're watching this on the...
Even guys doing any ICR, if they come into here, there are requirements which we're going to cover soon, which actually tell about the values that we should see or the limitations of these connections and these supplies in the desks.
John, next one.
Yeah, this is cable anchorage, which is an item that relieves the conductors from strain, including twisting, and additionally protecting the conductor insulation from abrasion at that point. Now, I've got some nice pictures of various cables and fittings going through the desk. And again, this is all about just preventing the cables from actually being damaged, because people are going to move this stuff about. Desks get moved, cables get pulled around. So again, very important to consider these things.
So can I just say that for those who are listening and watching on YouTube, I want those cable hangers on my desk without a doubt. And I don't think I've ever seen desks in like these photos ever. So I'm assuming these are Google and Apple HQ, where they have just got money to burn, or a Cat A office fit out. But yeah, I'd love to see desks like this. Weirdly enough, the newest, my favorite one, which covers what we're doing today, electrical installation in the furniture, is defined as total mains current carrying components interconnected within the furniture. And there's some photos there of lots of IEC connectors and lots of cables neatly stored and contained and maneuvered away. Other new definitions: extra low voltage. Now this is one that throws me. Extra low voltage is a circuit that is so designed and protected that under normal and single fault conditions, it's very interesting, the voltage between any two accessible parts, one of which may be the body or earth, does not exceed 42.4 volts peak or 60 volt DC. Where's 42.4 volts come from? I can't find any information on it.
We're worth looking into that one.
So we have obviously 50 volts and 25 volts going back over time with touch voltages and all that good stuff. But and I've looked for every edition, I can't find a reason why 42.4. I like it, because the lower the voltage, the better, to be perfectly frank, but I don't know where it's come from. So anyone listening, if you have some very clever research or white papers you've read, maybe you can tell us in the comments on the YouTube thing below. John, what do you think of that?
Well, 42.4 and 60 is it's root 2 is the difference between the two. So that's not a coincidence, is it?
Right, jumping into Appendix 3 of the PAT testing code. Right.
Yeah.
It's got here because it talks about these new, because I don't know if you've looked at the new PAT testing code, that they've introduced this new class of protection. And it's got there that there's BSEN 61140 as the standard ELV that we know of. But there's a product safety standard, BSEN 60950, called Information Technology Equipment. And it's in that that it pushes to the idea of Selv being 42.4 volts. So it's another peak of Selv from another perspective of this product standard.
I've read those standards for IT stuff, and for another reason I can't talk about here, but
it's in there.
Okay, so it's coming from the IT product standards.
It's coming from the alternative product standard. And if you've read the new code for PAT testing, you'd probably be familiar with that. There is a new method of approach to Selv and classes of protection. It's in there. Yeah, it's like merging it all together.
Why do we keep reinventing? Why can't it just be resistive loads with switches and breakers? And yeah,
I don't know.
It's getting right. So hazardous voltage is defined, David. A voltage exceeding 42.4 or 60 volts DC existing in a circuit that does not meet the requirements for a limited current circuit. Note, a limited current circuit is one that is so designed and protected under both normal conditions and likely fault, the current can be drawn is not hazardous.
Right, so obviously limited current circuit. That's assuming also fault conditions? It says so fault condition will not drawn into hazardous. So fault,
hazardous fault, which is a new one. HV.
Don't.
Oh my goodness me! Someone needs to. Anyway, moving on. So some other new definitions: rated voltage, primary power declared by the manufacturer; rated current, maximum input current of the office furniture or educational furniture as declared by the manufacturer. Notice the mistake there. It says office furniture or educational, which was the title of the standard, which they changed. So they didn't.
Oh, that's still in this current one, is it?
They didn't update the definitions. Socket outlet, single outlet providing entry. By the way, to the committee for this standard, I'm always available if you want me to comment on that standard. I'm considering myself a subject matter expert in it now. I've read it so many damn times over the last 3 years. Single outlet providing an entry for a plug, socket outlet, that's fine. Moving on, section 4.2 of the general requirements of this standard. It says furniture should make provision for a suitable cable management and or an electrical power distribution cable, which is fair enough. It then goes on to say, if anyone's looking at the pictures, you'll see lots of overloaded plugs. No single items of equipment plugged into outlets where provided exceeding 5 amps. So now this is where it really gets interesting. So if you've got single items of equipment plugged into outlets, if it exceeds 5 amps, then anything higher than 5 amps should be independently connected to the building's permanent electrical installation.
So if I have a assembly under this standard going to desks and then someone puts in a plug-in heater,
yes,
that's against that installation should basically instruct people not to plug that in.
Yes. So desktop heaters, when they plug them into the installation in the furniture, it's wrong. It shouldn't be plugged into the furniture in the desk because that's not designed to handle it. It has to go into the fixed installation like the floor boxes, etc. Although if you're using floor heaters, then you've either got a blood circulation problem or your aircon in your building's knackered. I've been in many offices where we've had the air conditioning wars, and I love it because I just lock out the controllers. But yes, anything over 5 amps, that's a key note. Anything over 5 amps can't go as part of your desk assembly. It has to be separately plugged in. So if you have an assembly, say you've got 4 sockets built into the desk, but you have a piece of equipment, like Dave said, it needs a separate socket.
And that's a single item.
Right. It's not just heaters either, because you've got certain offices like the very big laser printers, floor standing jobs. They can easily be way over 5 amps.
Yeah, big photocopiers can be over 5 amps.
So yeah, it's not just heaters. So.
And as you can see, the system must be rated to a maximum of 13 amps because that's your plug top. A couple of other bits. There's a section on earthing. What it does is it actually tries to give visual pictures that show the earthing of the furniture and the single insulated conductors contained within the furniture. The furniture, if you have single insulated conductors, then the furniture needs to be correctly earthed. But what it also shows is the flex or the double insulated cable coming in. And then it also shows where you would take that CPC and earth it down to the furniture. If you obviously had that variant of version of single, I don't know who would put single insulated conductors, to be honest with you, through it. You'd always have it in some sort of proprietary, well-glanded system.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're making a product under another standard, I don't know why you would put singles into furniture.
I wouldn't. But conductors in earth metallic conductive body, If it's in an earthed metallic conductive body, then the furniture does not need earthing, which is what virtually every single little angled socket thing that sits on desks. Effectively, you can sit it on the desk. It's earthed, it's class 1, relatively protected from impact and fault and all that jazz. So there's some nice pictures and stuff that cover all those variants. Now, this was another one, and this really annoyed me. Where no RCD is in the installation, RCD can be in the furniture. So now let's go to one of Dave's. Let's say your building that you've currently got Sparking Ninja HQ. You've got 3871 MCBs everywhere. Then it allows the RCBO or RCD to be inside the furniture.
Yep.
But they must be type A.
So this recalls that. I'm actually just reading it now. It's like there's a typo there.
There is a typo there, isn't there?
They've got their little M wrong. It's like 30 megaamps.
Yes.
Yeah, you need to get involved with proofreading this.
Sorry, I know. But it must be type A. So
that's a typo in the standard
changes. I know there's a typo. Stop it. Let's not embarrass them anymore. Must be a type A RCD. So this is now aligned with 76M1 because we've been saying for a long time type A is the minimum. We know, as Mr. Skirm belovedly says, we'll end up throwing them in the bin in 10 years anyway. Productive earth terminals to be resistant corrosion. I think that's just common sense, to be perfectly frank.
Do you know what though?
What
people won't actually know how to translate that.
Really?
As to what in many work environments and offices and stuff, what can cause corrosion and stuff.
Well, it's atmospheric temperature, heat, moisture, all sorts.
Because you go to an office, it's a pretty much controlled environment, but you go to this kind of stuff in more of a industrial location with probably different harsher conditions, you may have some corrosion coming in.
Yeah, I mean, you could have a desk in a shop floor for the foreman, and you could have machinery running, and there's vibration and all sorts. So
I actually I remember when I tested a library, and they had a desk in the middle of the room, and it was like a daisy chain of sockets all plugged into a floor socket, but the floor socket had kind of like been pulled and like twisted upward, so you could see the singles underneath, and it had loads of scum and crap and drink and all sorts of stuff that drained down the cables into that thing, and there was like a puddle of all weird stuff in this thing.
While we're on wild pat testing adventures, I went out to meet the pat testing guys on a former company, and we pulled the desks apart, and like you said, there was a cable management system for these 4-way trailing leads for each desk, and we pulled them all out and we ran them length to length, the entire length of the office. So in a bank of 4 desks, you had about 40 odd meters of IEC connectors. It was insane.
Good. That's gonna be great for those earthful live impedances.
Well, I just cut them all up, and there was loads of people without power the next day, but I didn't care, to be honest with you. Anyway, so resistant to corrosion. Well, what materials to use? Denso paste, Vaseline. You can treat these terminals if you need to. But yeah, 5.2.4 says the resistance of accessible metal parts no higher than 0.1 ohms.
Yeah,
no real explanation for that.
That's kind of like just copied out of the pat testing kind of code, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or the service inspection testing code. It's 0.1 plus R.
Right.
Isn't it in there?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm going to confess saying I try and avoid the pat testing code of practice as much as I can, to be honest with you, because I did the courses and I just did my.
I have to deliver the courses. I have to read the book.
I know you do. So supply connection, some interesting bits. Exposed length of flex, that is the flex in the desk, should be no longer than 2 meters inside the desk. Okay, so is that in the pat testing code of practice? Probably not.
Probably not, because there's actually a mention about this standard in the pat testing code, but it is literally 4.1.1, which just mentions it, and it covers RCD 30 milliamp, doesn't mention type A. Band 1 circuits, band 2 circuits should be kept separate as far as reasonably practicable. If they're hidden beneath the desks, they should be sufficiently mechanically protected. Containment conduit trunking should be installed to allow safe routing. Long-term multi-gang leads should be avoided by installing a sufficient number of socket outlets to supply it locally. So that's the fixed wire. There should be more fixed wire provisions instead of having loads of long daisy chain leads. Employers should not allow ad hoc solutions, and cables should be sufficiently protected and unable to become trapped or damaged. That's it.
So just to add to that, so within the standard, there's lots of bits in section 543 all the way through to 6, but there's some good bits. It says supply cord to ensure no undue strain. Again, that's in 7671 as well, including twisting, inlet bushing and cord guards should be used, so don't throw them away when you get the furniture. Also, interestingly, it has the 2 meter rule, not just inside the desk, but also from the point of connection to the desk. So effectively, you've got a maximum of 4 meter length. Again, that would be, I think that would be really good information. Maybe, do you know what? I when I was reading this standard, I actually thought it'd be a really good appendix in 7671.
It could be. I mean, it's not like it's definitely not. It's not really within the reach of 7. Maybe it is.
Weirdly enough, there is a 60364 standard which covers electrical installations in furnitures, but
yeah.
Not that I've read it. Anyway, I'm moving on from the pictures and the desk. So now there is also a section in which I really like called design requirements. Now, I don't know anyone who designs desk furniture other than desk manufacturers, but again, it's a question you could ask your designer. One of the comments in it that really grabbed me was 551A, no more than 4 outlets where each socket is separately fused or has an overcurrent protection rated at not more than 5 amps, or no more than 6 sockets where each socket is separately fused and has overcurrent protection at not more than 3.15 amps. Now, this is basically the rule that says when you go and buy your extension lead for the desk, you can have 4 extensions or 4 plug outlets. Each one has to be fused at 5 amp. So if you look at the picture on the screen, you'll see an example there of a socket with a fuse next to it that'll have a 5 amp fuse, or what we see in a lot of offices, what we call the quick blow fuses, the little glass ones. You can have up to 6, and they're all fused at 3.1 amps each. And all that is basically just a great way of subdividing and making sure selectivity.
Yeah, it's just selectivity, isn't it?
It's selectivity 101 for extension leads. How many people think of selectivity for extension leads? Since 6396. Henceforth, this is the glue that binds 7671 to the pat testers. Now, this is where I got I had to double take when I read this.
All right.
This is a change. So we got a picture of a 3-way desk trailing plug socket, and it's got 2 USBs. Please note it's below 4, so there's no fusing in this. Maybe that's something that they could probably keep, actually. But it does state 552, if up to 150 watt of ELV, so that would be your DC USBs, then the number of socket leads should be reduced. Number of sockets in leads should be reduced. So it doesn't say remove the fusing. It just says the number of sockets.
Yeah. So it's just changing. It's like changing 1 for 1, isn't it, really? Because fundamentally the USB is another demand. It
is another demand. But why have we removed the fusing? We've removed the selectivity from the leads. John, am I going bonkers here? Or
well, unless you add fusing to the actual USB.
Well, USB is generally, they should be current limited by design. So if you plug in too much stuff, it'll just switch off.
Yeah,
it should be, of course. Whether it really is in reality is another story. Yeah, this 150 watts seems an odd figure as well, because that's, again, it's a very specific figure. Where did 150 watts come from in the sort of choice of the rest of the thing? So,
John, this is what I like to do. I like to flabbergast my friends with all this weird and random research here, and everyone watching on YouTube. But it then says where ELV components have been added in excess of 150 watt, inrush current shall be taken into account. Now, I'm still going to go back to the first point. Those 3 plugs should still have a 5 amp fuse in them.
Right.
That's the intent of the standard. So maybe I've just selected the wrong picture deliberately. But yeah, so inrush current should be taken into account. Is there anything in any design guides for inrush currents of ELV?
Don't recall, mate.
Do
No.
we consider inrush currents in any major design works that we do? Is there any guidance or advice? Because, oh, by the way, there was a lot of silent moments in my brain while I was reading this. And I'm happy to say this is me pushing my knowledge. I'm not an expert in this. I was joking earlier on. And then it goes on to say, so there's a bit of guidance we need for this, I think, or is this predicting the future? The more ELV we have, the more we need to consider the balance between AC and DC and the electronics switching in and out and causing inrushes and surge that may cause spurious trips. Who knows? It then says for every 5 amp socket removed, no more than 700 watts of ELV should be connected.
Sorry, for every 5 amp that is removed, no more than 700 of ELV should be added.
Yep.
Right.
So let's look at that picture. There's 3 there. We've obviously removed 1. So those USBs are maxed out at 700 watts.
Yeah.
And the others aren't fused, but that's another story. And then it says for every 3.15, so if you have a 6-way lead, because I've seen desks at work, gorgeous, beautiful, 6 sockets, all at an angle, all the quick blow fuse, and then I'll have 4 USBs on them. And it says for every 3.15 amp socket removed, no more than 500 watts for ELV should be connected. I have no idea where any of this has come from as far as numbers and figures. I literally don't. If you guys do, fine. If not, the silence will be deafening. And if anyone,
the silence.
If anyone in YouTube world knows, add to the debate, fill in our knowledge, please, because this just blew my head. I was just like, okay, we've always known and we've always privately discussed there's a hell of a lot to. I mean, I remember asking you 80 ages ago about USB sockets and how we alter our designs when we're, let's say you are, I don't know, 6 radial, 20 amp radials around a house. How do you account for every single socket being DC, USB 3 or what, a 4 amp now? You can get up to them. So
it depends. The thing with USB now is it's not the power delivery one. It's not just the standard 5 volts because they can go up to 48 volts out of the same connector.
Great.
So what you're plugging in then has to negotiate with the thing in the hole to determine what voltage it's going to supply and how much current comes out. So it's now another whole can of worms in terms of that. So it's not just your 5 volts and current comes through. It's a whole world of extra stuff now.
Well, I still think in the future we will be putting DC rings or radials in with USB connectors in every room. John, you can read this one.
Right, this 559. Socket outlets and connectors shall be oriented or provided with the means to prevent the risk of electrical hazards from liquid spillage that can be reasonably expected, which, let's face it, in an office is your cup of coffee still pouring down and the bottles of water and all of that. So preventing the risk of electrical hazards from liquid. So you don't want the water pouring in the front of this thing.
No, but interestingly, I've seen desk installs where they are at the back and they're sunken down, and if you spilt a bottle of Coke or tea, it would go straight down the desk and straight into the socket.
Yeah, some are very different. Some are just a flap, and the flap will actually collect it, and then it'll just sit in there as well.
They're flaps.
You know,
they are. Some of them have fancy brush bars where the cables disappear and the liquid goes straight down and into them. So, although some of the pictures we shown earlier, you can see they're hidden underneath, so they're protected by default from spillages. So, interesting. Either getting a desk-mounted vertical one, maybe at an angle, or tucking it underneath the lip. But the ones with all the fancy brush bars and stuff, make sure they don't,
You've also got these ones where you hit them and they pop up, So they're obviously risk of being knocked as well.
Carry on, John.
5511. Socket outlet shall be located so as to be easily accessible, which seems fairly obvious, and minimize the risk of physical injury.
To them or to people?
Well, I imagine people, because physical injury is...
Can I just say, Dave, that every comment you make could end up getting this amended again. And I'm not doing another update on another amendment because Dave Watts part of the spelling and the intent of the standard. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, and 5612, free from sharp edges and no damage to the cable. So the typical cable grommets, as they're called, that go in the top of desks.
Yes.
And particularly important if it's a metal desk, obviously, with the slicing edges cutting in. But they're normally done anyway, because they just look a lot nicer than a big ragged hole hacked out the top of your expensive desk.
And they always get thrown away, don't they? Once they've gone through one cycle of pat testing, because someone's tried to pull a lead out and it's broke it and they couldn't put it back, so they've just thrown it away.
That's what happens if you have plastic ones. You can get metal desk grommets, actually, which are way better.
I mean,
that's only for the high class installations.
Well, call me a low class guy.
If I'm pat testing or in service special testing electrical equipment obviously we know the codes say that extension leads shouldn't be used as a permanent solution, and obviously I think there used to be something in there to say if they were using an office, they'd be limited about 3 meters or so. If we see anything else other than that in an office environment or a desk environment or a stationary static environment, should we kind of think more toward 6396 with regards to the way the cables are managed, the cables are contained, the cables are stowed? You know, it's a case of how to.
Yes.
Or do we need to look for deliberate efforts of
Dave,
this?
The reason why we're doing this is because whilst this is absolute, you know, this could put people to sleep very easily, there is some stuff in it that I think, whether you're in the in-service inspection and testing community or in the office fit-out electrical installation community, there is a gap.
There is.
This is definitely a bridge, and I think it's worth a listen. Well, hopefully you're watching this anyway, because they're more difficult to listen to.
I've done EICRs, and many times I've done EICRs, I've gone to a site that's got this kind of equipment set up, and I've just tested the sockets as normal without wondering or knowing about the additional requirements that 6396 would have had. You know, because it was out of my out of my understanding, so it was out of the scope of my inspection. But obviously, it could very much have been inclusive, and if it was, I probably would have found that there were some issues or some things to raise with it, especially with the daisy chaining of sockets, but on one single socket. So I think it's very valid for people who do EICRs or pat testing to them to understand that there is this little bolt on they may want to consider looking into.
Yep. So couple of other little bits which I didn't actually think was a thing, and they are. Again, design requirements. There are requirements to ensure 50mm separation between cables, or a cable management system doesn't need to be continuous, or cable screening of individual surfaces. So that separation and segregation of the installation is about maintaining it through the desk.
So it's a bit like 528, isn't it, of 7671? It's just in this fashion.
But there is a little caveat that says the cable support should be every 300mm under a desk. It's a little electrical installation rule of thumb there. 300mm for cable supports under a desk. There you go. Luminaires should be positioned so they allow full movement of furniture and risk of injury. Well, yeah, that's just kind of a given, really. But it's interesting to see that they see luminaires as an integral part. Now, this is the one that blew my head. Batteries. John, you can blow my head again and explain this to me.
Yep, number 7, batteries. Batteries shall conform to relevant standards. Doesn't say which they are. Account shall be taken of any heat generated by batteries. The security of the fixing of batteries and power cables shall be ensured, and batteries shall be positioned such that they allow full movement of the furniture and minimise the risk of physical injury when in use. That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It's such a small little section. They've just gone batteries. Oh yeah, mentioned batteries, and then they've moved on.
Well, the batteries, I mean, are we talking about physical injury of the batteries themselves, or the batteries causing injury to people?
Probably both, but this is a really interesting spot because I was on a UK Power Networks call about rotary grid disconnections, which is the potential of blackouts because of all the scaremongering and all the greed that's going on with the cost of living crisis. And there was probably about 200 people on this call just from the NHS, and a lot of them were talking about people, vulnerable persons at home, and how they would cope. And of course, UKPN were doing their best foot forward for, well, it's the NHS's problem, not ours. And obviously the conversation steered between home batteries. Now, you look at some of this, that the picture we're showing there is bolted onto like a sofa, effectively. Right. Now,
it's like an assistance chair.
It's an assistance chair, and that's fine, but you're going to have to thermally design that chair. And those chairs, as we all know, especially ones that assist people up and down, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of mechanics. And if you put them in against a radiator or something else, there's that external influences, the life of the batteries, the safety of the batteries, the spillage on batteries. So it's quite a vague and generic thing, but I suppose at least it's because it's the first time it acknowledges batteries as an inherent part of furniture.
Right.
I wanted more. And for those thinking about it, there should be more.
I mean, there should be. I mean, that bit on the screen there, that is the entirety of that whole 7 or section 7 there. That's it. There is literally nothing else in there. And yet batteries, obviously, they're going to be in everything, but they're already in most things anyway. So it's
my brother's got one in his desk.
Yeah,
he's got an electric desk and it's got a battery. Should obviously the power go so he can lower it and raise it.
Well, now you
doesn't run for long, but he's got a
You can call him up late at night and read him BS 6396.
Go have a look. See what product's done and the battery complies with.
You can see I've read it a lot because I can just say it off the top of my head. BS 6396. I'm not going to write a book on it, and I'm not going to. Yeah, it was hard work reading all these. I can promise you, it was painful.
Wow. Okay. So we have electrical tests, do we?
We do. We have an entire section on electrical testing. Please know it doesn't follow the norms of 7671, but it does include, now this is the interesting bit, recommendations for inspection, testing and maintenance, including maintenance. Please don't ask me why.
So do we need a 6396 schedules of inspections?
Yeah. No, we don't.
Oh, okay.
It does obviously from the PAT testing world, of continuity test using an AC source and DC voltage, a 12-volt test. For 1.5 times supply plug fuse, 19.5 amps, but no greater than 25 amps.
Play old hard tests.
Yeah. Test to include from plug across all cores, metal pass furniture. Test to last 5 to 20 seconds, reading no higher than 0.1 ohms.
Yeah. See, I love this because this is how testing of continuity protected conductors used to be carried out and should still be carried out, especially for long cord sets and daisy chains and extension leads. We need to apply that amount of current for a good period of time to allow any poor connections or any bare minimum connections or damaged connections to actually heat up and snap and break. Yeah,
definitely. Because the new machine, the new ones don't like 200 milliamps or something, isn't it?
Yeah, they just kiss it. They don't even test it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, shoving the high current. I have equipment that can do that.
Weirdly enough,
I only buy equipment that will do that. I'll only buy equipment that I can go and say how many amps I'm going to put in and how long I'm going to put them in for.
Well, I've actually got an old Seaward PAT tester I was going to drop off to you in a couple of weeks.
Bring it up, mate. Is it like a Europa or something?
It's a Seaward one.
The Supernova Europa.
It's big. It's big and close.
As long as it hasn't got prime test written on it, then I don't mind.
No.
That's
fine.
No. That's fine.
Moving on. IR test. 500 volt DC, no less than 1 meg, minimum of 5 seconds. Remove sensitive parts of equipment, Luminaires LED. Now, in 7671, we don't say IR test for 5 seconds, do we?
No, but it should.
It
should say a lot longer than that.
Yeah, but IMFTs can't put the power out.
Are we being controversial?
No, there's a chap. There's a chap on YouTube. There's a chap on YouTube. Is it
if you go with the CPSs, it's push the button. The minute you see it going up and across, that'll do.
Yeah, we're supposed to. I mean, to properly stress test the installation, we've got to let it build up its capacitance within the system.
Oh, you're talking about capacitance and reactance in the circuit. Oh, let the protective devices do that, Dave. Let's not be controversial.
Put it in there for a few, for a while. Then it'll start to then fall when it gets to it.
Yeah, I remember when I had my Robins. You would hold the button in, wouldn't you? You would push the button and lock it in. And you weren't afraid to hold an IR test. Yeah. But so there you go.
You should hold it, I'd say 10 seconds plus on an actual installation, because if you've got huge long circuits or whatever, it could take that long just to charge up the cables, just with the capacitance of them. So if you're just poking the button for half a second and saying, oh yeah, it's all good, well, fortunately you're doing it wrong. So
Dave,
try holding the button next time.
YouTube is demanding a hidden test update.
Yes.
Now, this is the one that I just got. Ugh. So there's a section just on marking of desks, and believe it or not, and I've never seen this on the desk. But desks should include a legible label with a name, trademark, or means of identification of manufacturer. the number and date of this British standard, so it should say BS 6396 2022 or 2015, a statement indicating whether the furniture is earthed or unearthed construction, on earth furniture, the position of any earth terminal using the earth symbol, information about the instructions for proper use, the rating of the system is stating 250 volt AC. Please note that they haven't removed the A.C. So they've got a mixture of AC capitals and lowercase, so another typo, and that the total current should not exceed 13 amp. The maximum current rating for each fuse adjacent to its fuse holder. And it goes on and on and on. And for furniture that contains batteries, identify the relevant battery type, indoor, outdoor usage, and instructions on use. All on a label.
So this label is the size of an A4 piece of paper, isn't it? Stapled on the bottom.
Just the underside of the desk.
What we should do is literally crawl under our desks now and look for that label, and we'll all come back and go, nope. Because
so if
up a can of worms.
But I mean, some of this stuff under 6396, if you were to Google that, you can actually, like you've seen pictures of here, you don't buy a desk that's got it all in. You can buy the stuff and
yes. But Dave,
install it in a desk. So do you now have to make the label?
Yes, but Dave, what this actually means is you can go into a wholesaler's, and rather than wind them up and say, give us a box of BS 951s, you can say, you don't have any BS 6396 tables kicking around, do you?
Sheets of them.
Or go around IKEA, take the long walk and go, excuse me, have you got any BS 6396 compliant desks, please? I'm very disappointed. Interesting information. Probably should put that, if you're doing a Cat A office fit out and it's, you're doing it all, and then maybe
it makes sense. I mean, it is an assembly, and so the label should declare what the assembly should have, and someone who then does maintenance should verify it still as it should be. But difference between intention and what we're doing.
If you're a manufacturer of desks and office furniture, does it need to be CE and UKCA marked as well? Because some of that applies under that.
Yes, it would.
Situation.
You're just being difficult now, John. But yes,
so there's certain amount of overlap involved.
I do remember why I put this picture of a cow swimming with a dolphin. I was listening. You're going, what? Because I probably have more chance finding that than I would a compliant label on a desk. But it does cover rules on the height of letters and symbols to make sure you fill the entire underside of the desk with all that knowledge, and it's got to be legible, durable, and not removable in normal use. So
this is a call out to anyone listening or watching YouTube. First person to send me a picture of this label will get a Kit Kat in the post.
Wow. Well, now that's a challenge.
That's a challenge.
Other things, instructions, another section, instructions concern the safe installation and use of the furniture should be readily accessible and include the following. Are we going to put a little A4 wallet underneath the desk to pull the documents in, like a full O&M? Instructions for connecting and testing continuity polarity in accordance with clause 7, voltage, frequency, and rated current, the maximum current for the fuse and type, a statement that no single item of equipment having a rated voltage exceeding 250, another typo, or rated current exceeding 5 amps should be connected to the item of furniture. Why would you put a rated voltage exceeding 250 onto a desk? I don't know. Instructions for connecting earth conductors for metalwork, a statement that is essential for the electrical system to be connected to an electrical supply that has an earth conductor, and a statement that the advice of the person competent in such installation matters shall be sought to ensure the installation is safe. Well, I think, in my opinion, this is the first time we've publicly or on YouTube. I'll be stunned if there's a video on BS 6396 anywhere on YouTube instructing this. And I've looked, and there are no training courses on 6396. So how in God's name you become competent is beyond me.
Let me add that to the pile.
Yes, you can do the director's cut of this, Dave, if you want. So further reading, interestingly, and I'm not doing this yet. So electricity work regs, Pure 98, 1363. One other wanted to introduce BS 4163, health and safety for design and technology in educational and similar establishments. Now, what's that? Hark, I hear you say. It is another standard that covers electrical installations in schools.
I read that one 2 years ago.
We did, because if you remember, our good friend Mr. Naji was doing some installation work, and he wanted some advice, and our brother Paul Skirm gave the usual no BS 4163. So there is another companion, 7671. I know I haven't written a course on it because it's a bloody big standard. It covers lots of things because it's health and safety.
Yeah, it's not just
design.
electrical. It's like,
but there's some very good
lots of
electrical.
nuggets in it, if I remember right.
Yeah, the 10 milliamps because children are more vulnerable. 10 milliamp RCDs, Blakely transformers, isolating
lighting levels as well. I think.
Yeah.
Was in there,
and plungers, e-stops for the room, so that you can kill all the power immediately. Not just for gas, but for electrical as well. So if you do electrical installations in schools, 4163, BS 4163, very, very worth having a look at. I don't think it's been updated in a while. Sometimes these committees just disappear.
They just sneak them in, don't they?
Yeah, a couple of other bits. Obviously, is this TEE? Is it T? How do you pronounce it?
Oh, that's the bit I read out earlier. Yeah.
So I updated this because the last time I spoke to Dave about it, he nagged me and he said, look, there is a section in the TE, which is the IET code of practice or PAT testing, the old PAT testing money, in service inspection document 4.1.1, and it actually does refer to BS 6396 as guidance, and it talks about points should be adhered to. Socket outlet supply and item of furniture should be protected by an RCD, providing additional protection, i.e. 30 milliamp. Cables of band 1 and 2 should be kept separate. Cables of band 1 and 2, often hidden beneath desks, should be sufficiently mechanically protected from movement of chairs, storage of materials, feet and legs. Cable management should be cable management systems or containment such as conduits should be installed to allow safe routing and protection. Long-term use of multi-GAN extension leads should be avoided by installing a sufficient number of socket outlets to supply the equipment to be used. That's one that gets missed quite a lot, isn't it? Not enough boxes. Employers should not allow ad hoc solutions to be created by users. Really interesting one that most employers fail to follow. Cable should be sufficiently protected and unable to become trapped or damaged. Generally, there is no requirement to ensure electrical continuity across metallic frames of furniture unless the frame has been designed to be used as a protective conductor. Okay. Probably argue that, but yeah, he's probably following the letter of that earthing section, yes, but I think just good practice. Possibly you might want to check it anyway. Especially if internal wiring comprises flexible, insulated and sheathed. The frame should not need protective bonding. Yes, it doesn't need to. By the way, it used to. In the early standards, it used to have a separate bond on it. Where luminaires are installed in display stands, 1 or 2 methods against protected shock, salve, extra low voltage, or an RCD. No, it doesn't mention anything about type A.
Doesn't mention anything about type A. It's interesting.
Going back to the start where we talked about the duty of care, very important. Mr. Skirm would, if he was here, he'd be saying this. Regulation 10, duty of care. Every employer shall ensure that an item of work equipment conforms at all times with any essential requirements. In this regulation, essential requirements in relation to an item of work equipment means requirements relating to design and construction of work equipment, of its type, of the instruments listed in Schedule 1, being instruments which give effect to community directives. So this is the Paul Skirm essential health and safety requirements of low voltage directives, EMC directives, machinery directives, IT directives, product directives, which then filter down into the Health and Safety at Work Act, Regulation 2, employer's duty to comply, and then the duty of care under PURE, under Regulation 10, to provide safe work equipment. And it's basically came in since 1992, effectively. So that duty of care for the employer since 92 has been firmly, robustly put in law that the employer has to ensure it conforms. So if you're in an office, you're on a job and someone's going, yeah, we'll just fit you a load of furniture, and you go, does it comply with BS 6396? And the designer says, I don't know, mate, I don't know anything about it. As an employer, putting people to work in that, you need to have done sufficient due diligence to give you a defense. Because if you haven't, and you buy a load of cheap shite from IKEA, and you know due diligence whatsoever, and lash all the install in with a bunch of basically labourers or ground workers who are just doing wires because they're cheap, and then someone gets a massive electric shock and gets hurt, then you're going to be done for a breach of Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work Act. And what they will do is they will use PURE, Regulation 10, as supplementary evidence to beat you with. Then they'll insert BS 6396 up your backside, and then you'll go, oh. So just be mindful. There's that hierarchy of understanding of legislation and decision making.
Yeah, I mean, as it says in the IT code, the ICT one, ad hoc is a real thing. And when you have a fixed electrical installation, you've got sockets over there, sockets over here, then suddenly you go to occupy a space, or you're changing of occupancy and you occupy a space, and suddenly you put people in different positions and you haven't considered the way to safely install the systems, and you go ad hoc and you just throw leads in, or you do little connections, or you put in a bit of this and a bit of that. You may go, well, 767 doesn't give me any good firm guidance or any technical ways to do this. This is what 6396 is doing. It's giving you some level of guidance and boundary in this sense. And that is, again, the definitive little technical bit that will then be used to support the arm of the Regulation 10 with Pure, if you do not actually do the due diligence on it. So you've got to look for these things. No, they're there.
I think, I mean, we've just done, I've done probably 10 days over the last 3 years writing that and reading it and reading it and reading it. So I'm glad it's done. I would suggest that probably it may be worthwhile that being developed into a one-day bolt-on to PAT testing, or as an in-betweener somewhere. But I do think that should be a formal city and guild of some form.
Well, this is what I actually have been talking. So obviously, 6396 has been on my radar for a while because we've been looking at this for so long, and I've been reflecting on when I've seen this kind of situation, and I've actually talked to the city and guilds about it, and I've looked at the 5th edition of the code. I think that this specific little area is relative to people who do pad testing or the IS inspection service, because they will be approaching this space, but also people doing EICRs with fixed wire. If they're doing fixed wire testing and they start to see desks and there's an assembly of desks, there is obviously that if you are going to certify that they are safe and you certify them, or you say they're suitable to 767, they're not maybe within the scope. So you need to understand where that line is and decide where you cross over.
It's interesting there's no test certificates for any of this as well, or no pro formas. So I think there could be work done to develop this. And I agree with you. It's probably something that needs to be either integrated into the PAT testing or done as a complementary accessory. But I do think for those who work in the high-end commercial office fit out, Cat A, Cat B fit outs, this is probably a good underpinning qualification that could go to, you know, helping an organization level up and demonstrating their competency and their skills. For me, I never want to see this thing again. I am sick to the back teeth of BS 6396. I really am. It's a fascinating journey. It really has been.
Does it make sense to you, because you've read it so much? Does it make sense for it to exist?
Yes.
Do you see a place for it?
Yes.
Okay.
It is a like that 4163. There are complementary parts of 7671 which would be good as appendices, but I think there's definitely something there that could be taken out into the PAT testing world, maybe as a bridge between the doing and the management of PAT testing. There could probably be more developed schedules, more testing stuff.
There's
the
a need to
stuff's got a lot of expansion.
Yeah, with the batteries and obviously with USBs, there is a need for us to branch out a bit from where we've been very comfortable for 20 years now.
Yeah.
With our inspection testing services. It's time for us to branch out and be more adaptable. And there might be a few little standards like this and a few little other standards about little areas are needed just to enhance our knowledge and our skill set and how we assess risk with these things.
Mr. Ward, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a danger here of this sort of thing becoming overlooked, because like I said earlier, if you've got someone going in to test the fixed wiring, they could say, oh, well, that's not in our scope because it's not fixed wiring. And then you've got PAT testing people go in and say, oh, well, it's not ours because it's not portable equipment. So there's a danger of this being lost between the two, unless someone actually says, yeah, it is going to be covered under this, or it's going to be covered under that. So I think it should be covered on both, at least as an additional on, say, both fixed wiring and PAT testing, at least to make people aware of it, so that at least it is actually covered by at least one of those two things. Otherwise, you get this sort of void in the middle where nobody's actually really testing this stuff or looking at it or taking any responsibility for it.
I told you he was a wizard. Genius words in a succinct way from the king of succinct. Yeah, I can't really follow that up with anything, really.
No. And to be honest, it's not big, and there's good little bits of information. So if you do either of them, the ICRs or PAT, it won't be a lot of work for you to just look at 6396 and just add that inspection to your remit, add little tests that are required in it to your remit, and you can add it to improve your quality of service.
I don't disagree with that. Okay, well, other than that, I think we're kind of pretty much done on the whole 6396 stuff, thank the Lord. I think the only thing really to wind this down with is probably to explain when the next podcast will be, which is, we don't know. Quite simply, John is ridiculously busy. I am on a project until at least April, full time. We are recording this very late at night. I think it's fair to say, Dave, with your new teaching school and the ever-growing family, time is more precious than ever, and we only want to do this when there's something interesting to talk about. I think 6396 is something nobody's talking about, and hopefully it will stimulate some interesting debate, because that's what this is about: stimulate the mind, stimulate debate and opinions. I do think we've got more to do on diverted neutral current, and if you don't mind me saying, I have written over Christmas a little manual on diverted neutrals, which is currently going through peer review, and I'm hoping later this year it will be out.
Yeah, DNC is we're going to return to DNC for a couple more, but there's more to come, so it'd be silly for us to do it today.
Yes,
the space is still evolving.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I don't think we'll probably do anything more until at least after April, maybe summer. It might be worthwhile tying it up when the document comes out, because it will be released formally. That's all really I can say. And I've done lots of freedom of informations, and hopefully we'll do a podcast that will enhance what's in the written, if that makes sense. And hopefully just put the knowledge out there, because it's been an incredible journey of research and understanding. And so get that killed off, and then maybe at Christmas, maybe I'll have my RCD stuff finished, which I've been working on for years as well. And if you think that was epic, the RCD one is just overwhelmingly epic. But I think we'll end up with the most epic, detailed ever go through of RCDs in the history of the world, because I've got the PowerPoint, you guys have seen it, and there's still stuff to add. So that's my task for the summer. So other than that, really, final thoughts before I wind this one down, Dave?
This is a subject that I have obviously read the standard, I read the older one, I've read the newer one. I get its purpose, I get why it's a thing, and it's very easy for us to go, and not take things too seriously. And there is some fluff in it in 6396, but if you actually get the technical bits, this should be this should be that, a lot of it makes sense, and it's a lot of guidance and information we haven't really actually had before. So yeah, I do like it as a little bolt-on standard, and I will be developing some material on it for both my 2377s and 2391s and stuff, because I think it's useful to have. It's nice to have extra bits of information with this. Otherwise, for me, I will be carrying on talking with you guys behind the scenes and pushing in the development of other things that we're doing. I've got a few guys in the Discord that want to do a bit of podcasting as well, like Dave Betteridge and a couple of other lads.
Oh yes, of course.
So we may get them in. What we might do is a couple of trial runs on the Sparking Ninja podcast, just to see if we can put the get the practice wheels off, and then he can come over and do some E5.
Good idea, because I am not going to be able to do another one.
You're going to be so busy, mate.
Yeah, I know.
So we might do a couple just to kind of talk about live work, about arc flash risk and stuff. But then what we'll do is we'll do the biblical ones on the 5.1 when you're back and we're ready, and we're not all so busy. But so we'll be putting some stuff out in the space, that's for sure.
And before I go to John, one last thing: we are all going to Ireland later this year.
Oh, good. Yeah, I need the dates for that.
Yeah, it's November, but we're all going to go on a Top Gear tour, Jolly Boys outing. And it's going to be fun and chaos and mayhem, because you're going to meet my dad and see where I'm from in Northern Ireland, and it's going to be great fun.
That'd be great.
Mr. Ward, you always get the last word, sir.
Yeah, this one, I think, just say that if you're doing an EICR somewhere, or you're doing appliance testing somewhere, and there is office furniture and stuff around, just ask them who's dealing with that, because you might find that it's nobody. And that's really not an acceptable situation. So if it is there, just be aware that it exists, and it may be necessary to have a look at it, test it, make sure it's in working order, and it's not going to actually kill their employees. So pretty important.
Yes, not killing people is always a good thing. Okay, other than that, I think we've explained ourselves enough. God knows how long we've been on this, but for those who are listening or watching, thank you very much. We will see you whenever we see you. And until the next one, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Yeah, take care of yourself and each other. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right.